Hi guys, welcome back to Nyx Reads. Today we're doing my very last wrap up for 2022, talking about all the books that I've read and finished in December. I had such an amazing reading year. I finished a total of 94 books, which for me personally is a record. And I figured I'm going to start this video with some nice juicy stats for the overall reading year from Storygraph, which I have an account, so if you want to follow me on there or in Goodreads, you feel free to do so. And if you aren't subscribed yet, please feel free to do so and give this video a like if you enjoy bookish content like me and are always scouring YouTube videos to find new books to put on your TBR. So I read a total of 94 books across over 26,000 pages, and my main moods were reflective, mysterious, and emotional. Dark slipped to the 4th place, which usually is higher up because I read quite a bit of thrillers and suspense novels and mystery novels. I guess the reason why reflective and emotional is on the top 3 is because I read much more nonfiction and memoirs this year, as well as literary fiction. Most of the books I picked up are between 300 and 499 pages. I picked up a few books over 500 pages, and a good chunk is under 300 pages, which explains why I've been able to read so much more books this year. What really stands out to me is that 21% of what I read was nonfiction this year, 79% was fiction. If I look at how the stat looked like in 2021, I only read 9% fiction versus 21% now, so that's great. My top genres were contemporary, thriller, mystery. Not a surprise. I'm happy to see that fantasy is still in the top 10. Classics made it into the top 10 because I really pushed to read more classics this year, as you know. And also very happy to see LGBTQIA+ in my top 10. I'm also happy to see a completely new split in format, which is a new one for this year. So 45% of what I read was in print, so either I owned the book or I borrowed a physical copy from the library. 13% was digital, which means I consumed it as an ebook. 43% of what I read was as audiobook, which is great. I finally diversified on how I read my books, which helped the amount of books that I finished. Again, if I compare it to 2021, so different. 91% of what I read was in print, 6% digital, and only 4% was audio. There's nothing crazy in the most read author stats. The most I read from one author is 3 books, which is Agatha Christie, an old, new to me favorite author I discovered last year. A stat that I really need to change for this year is the languages. I read 89 books in English and only 5 books in German, which is my mother tongue. It's my first language. I only read 5 books. I definitely need to change that. And my average rating for the year was 3.61. As you can see, I read so many amazing 4-star books and a few 4.5 and 5 stars. So those were last year's stats. Now let's get into the December books. On a side note, I didn't abandon my bookshelf that I newly reorganized. It's just that I've been having so many house guests, so I had to relocate to the bedroom to film a few videos in peace. These 9 books are not going to be in any particular order. I'm just going to try to group them by genre. Let's start with the light and breezy with romance, which I just might become a romance reader in 2023 because I've been trying out books here and there and I've been finding some that really do work for me. Starting on a high note, I listened to The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox, which is a pen name for a writing duo actually. This is about the twins Charlie and Cass. They live 2 very different lives. They're best friends, but Charlie is in LA. She's a celebrity chef host for a baking show, whereas Cassie stayed at home in Colorado and is taking care of the family-owned bakery. One thing leads to another and they end up having to do a swap where one has to live the other's life and pretend they're them. This was an almost perfect holiday romance for me. On the spectrum of the romance grid, this is definitely more rom-com. This had everything I could have wanted. It has a baking show, a family-owned bakery, a swap story, cute animals, great family bonds. The characters are all pretty much super likable, and I didn't mind the insta love at all because at the end of the day, I think the authors did a great job on getting me on the character side because I understood where the characters were all coming from and their motivations and dreams. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5. I subtracted the 0.5 just because I thought the ending laid it on just a bit too thick. It was just, that was just the thing that was a bit, okay, this is a bit much, but everything else I enjoyed so much. Definitely put this on your holiday reading list for next year. And I think this would be for fans of The Princess Switch with Vanessa Hudgens, that cheesy movie on Netflix. If you like that, I think this could be something for you. I'm gonna sandwich it here with the romances, so now I'm gonna talk about one that unfortunately wasn't really for me. It's One Day in December by Josie Silver. If you want to hear more thoughts on this one, I actually filmed a full holiday themed vlog where I talk about listening to this audiobook along with baking a bunch of Christmas cookies. I will say that this book is for fans of One Day by David Nichols. It's that romance that was then filmed with Anne Hathaway, because this book is about Laurie's and Jack's relationship unfolding over the span of over 10 years, so just like in one day. The story kicks off with Laurie randomly sitting on a bus and then spying Jack, or she doesn't know his name is Jack, this man at a bus stop, and she starts obsessing over him for the next year or so in trying to spot this mystery guy somewhere around the city. But a year later, her best friend introduces this guy Jack as her new boyfriend. So this puts Laurie in a very difficult situation, or so it seems, because she's been in love with this mystery guy for a year and now it's her best friend's boyfriend. And to summarize my thoughts that I also expressed in that vlog, at first I didn't really like Laurie. I thought it was just, the base was just such a weird obsession over someone she spotted just for a second that I couldn't really get behind. But I thought she had a great character growth and she did get me on her side. It's just that in the end, I really was left super disappointed with the choices that she made within her romantic relationships. I thought she was taking quite a step back there in terms of maturity and growth. And Jack's life unfolding over those 10 years was such a cliche. The cliche of a guy going through a bunch of women until he finds the right one who can turn him around. Also, I found that the plot relied heavily on personal tragedies for the characters to evolve. On the bright side, Sarah, Laurie's best friend, she was actually one of my favorite characters in the book. I thought she was such a strong woman who didn't always make all the right decisions, but she really owned her life. And also the relationship between Laurie and Sarah, I thought that was actually my favorite part. On the spectrum of romance, this book is definitely more on the drama side. Unfortunately, it wasn't for me, but again, if you're a fan of relationships evolving over 10 years, if you liked One Day, then you should pick up this book. Jumping back to a romance that I did enjoy, I listened to Below Zero by Ali Hazelwood. So this was my first ever encounter with Ali Hazelwood. I know that her books have been on everybody's radar during the last year or two. On the romance spectrum, this is definitely more on the steamy side, but with way more to it. It's not just that, which is why I was so positively surprised. So this is from the Loath to Love You book, which features 3 novellas, which when I picked it up, I didn't realize that. So it's 3 novellas following 3 girlfriends that all work in STEM. That seems to be Ali Hazelwood's speciality. And obviously looking at their respective love stories. So in this novella, we follow Hannah. Judging from her last name, I think she's Latina, but don't quote me on that. She's a NASA aerospace engineer. She finds herself stranded at an Arctic remote research station. Who comes to rescue her? Of course, it's her longtime rival, arch nemesis. So you can already guess that this is an enemies to lovers trope. This was 100% successful in intriguing me and wanting to pick up first the other 2 novellas within the series, and then eventually Ali Hazelwood's full-length novel. What I really liked about Hannah is that she wasn't just a wunderkind. She had to work really hard to get to where she is now. What convinced me is the very decent character work that Ali Hazelwood did within this super short story. Because yes, it was all fun and games to hear about the romance part, but at the same time, the characters didn't fall flat because you also learned a lot about their background and their motivation. It didn't get a perfect score because sometimes it was lacking a bit of nuance for me. So for example, Hannah was kind of your typical don't want any relationships. I'm super closed off. I was bird before, I think it was, and I don't want anything serious. So I thought, okay, maybe it could have used a bit more depth there. And also, because you're reading from Hannah's point of view, she really has the hots for this guy who is, I think, described as super tall, redhead. Because it is just really not my personal taste, I thought it was a bit much, and I couldn't relate to that, you know. Obviously that is highly subjective, but at the end of the day, I am very much interested to pick up the other two novellas, so I consider this a win. And then the last romance I read, which I didn't realize that I read 4 romances in December. I guess I was in a very cozy mood, which is not surprising. So it was The Santa Suit by Mary Kay Andrews. I found this randomly on the Libby app. And again, if I'm categorizing this within the romance section, this is more Hallmark than anything else I read. Ivy Perkins is our protagonist. She is newly divorced and she buys an old farmhouse sight unseen in a small town where she wants to start over. While she's straightening up the house, she finds a box with a very nice Santa suit, and then in one of the pockets she finds a letter from a little girl way back that had a secret Christmas wish, and she becomes curious into if that wish was fulfilled, and this letter kind of contributes to her integrating into the community, which that is a large part of the story. This has high reviews on Goodreads. I think it's at almost 4 stars. Very positive reviews, but to me this was a 2-star. Yes, I obviously expected this to be cheesy, to have insta-love, but unfortunately this for me lacked complete character depth. There was barely any backstory to any of the characters. Even the protagonist, we just know that she got out of a not so great marriage, that her husband cheated on her, but there was not a lot to it. In the end, there was just really not much that tethered me to the characters. Yes, it is a short book. I think it's under 300 pages, but as I just talked about the short story by Ali Hazelwood, it shows that you can develop characters even if you don't have a lot of pages, so that's why for me this was a 2 stars, unfortunately. Also, there was quite a few odd comments in this book about weight. I thought there was some sentences in there that I thought were not very body positive. For example, the love interest says this to Ivy, our protagonist: "Is it some kind of diet thing? I mean, not to get personal or anything, but seems to me you could stand to eat a few cheeseburgers." And then I thought, oh, maybe this was written like 10-20 years ago, but it's not. It's from 2021. Anyways, moving on to a small Christmas book that I consumed super fast. It's How the Grinch Stole Christmas by Dr. Seuss. So this is the story about the fantastical grump who despises Christmas. I mean, it's a children's book. It was just a heartwarming, fast read. I've never read this before. That's why I picked up this beautiful, cute copy. And the movie with Jim Carrey is a staple in our household during Christmas. Super fast and very lovely read. I just think that the rhymes are so cute. To stay on the fantastical genre, I also read, and this was the last book that I read this year, it's Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, German edition, so at least I contributed to my German book stat at the end of the year. I received this for Christmas as a gift last year and I never got to it, so that's why I thought, you know what, it's sitting on my bookshelf, I'm picking it up. There's not much to say about this other than it brought me right back to childhood. I felt like I was in elementary school reading this book for the first time again, especially because I read it in German back then, and this is again in German. And then I read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Where do I start? This is 4.5 stars out of 5. This is an amazing book with so many unexpected twists and turns. This is so hard to explain and to review because you don't want to give anything away. So essentially, I will just say the same thing as any other booktuber who talks about this book, which is that we follow our main character, Piranesi. He is in a huge house with a lot of vestibules. You'll read that word a lot. I had to look up what exactly it is. And a lot of rooms, a lot of statues. He's been there for, to us and to him, an unknown amount of time for an unknown reason. I think everybody warns you that this is incredibly confusing in the beginning. which is fine. You will start to understand, and the reason why you're confused is because Piranesi is confused. He doesn't know what's going on either. You need to pick this up if you're at all interested in fantasy books or even suspense novels. What I thought was interesting is that I expected this to be a full-blown fantasy novel with magical creatures, maybe even dragons, or, you know, mystical creatures, just because of the cover. That was my expectation, and yes, I got that aspect of it, but I also felt like it was switching in between fantasy, a bit of sci-fi, and even dark academia vibes. I wasn't expecting that, but I thought that was very interesting and nice. I read this as my first ever buddy read with Camila from Hasty Books, and I'm so glad we did it. We used storygraph to swap notes and comments back and forth, which worked really great. It was the first time I tried that. So what you do is you just update your status on what page you are on the storygraph app, and then you're able to unlock the comments as you reach the points where the new comments are for. This is a perfect book for a buddy read because there's so many theories that you think of what is happening, and it's great to have someone to, you know, bounce ideas back and forth with. Great book. The premise is so unique and the characters are great. There's very kind characters in here, but also very cruel characters. It just worked overall very well. And thank you, Camila, for reading this with me. Then I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, who is a Nobel Prize winning author. I also featured my thoughts while reading this on a vlog, or even 2 vlogs, again while I'm baking some holiday treats, so you can watch that if you want to hear more about what I was thinking during the process. This is a classic within the dystopian and speculative fiction genre for a reason. The characters we follow are Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy. They're 3 kids who grow up together in the Hailsham Academy. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, by the way, in the English countryside, which makes them very, very special, and a very tragic, mysterious fate awaits them. So they all grow up together as children, then as adolescents, and Kathy in her adulthood, she becomes a carer, and this is when she reminisces about her time at Hailsham and her time with Tommy and Ruth. So essentially this book is told from her perspective, thinking about what happened in the past, and that is how the reader learns about the full truth of that academy. The timeline in this book is very interesting because obviously you do bigger jumps, like 10 years at a time back, when Kathy thinks about what happened when they were small or when they were teenagers. But within that, you almost take like small steps back and forth as well, because what happens is she will think of an event that happened in a way that's like, oh, but I know now obviously why this is odd. And then just a few paragraphs after, a few pages after, then you learn why whatever happened was odd. So you do bigger steps back, but then also smaller steps. This is very hard to review without giving anything away, kind of like Piranesi, but despite the genre, this is not a story of rebellion. The complacency of the characters is incredibly sad and maddening at times. Everything about their upbringing is completely messed up, and you discover that bit by bit, which is kind of disturbing. And that includes their coming of age time, and there's just this incredible sad undertone to everything. This raises questions on humanity, on ethics, on what is right and wrong, the cruelty of people, and what science means to society. I did not cry reading this book, but my heart felt so heavy. And one of the most messed up things about this book is the description of the characters' appearances. If you know, you know. 5 stars. This is so thought-provoking and just very, very profound. And lastly, I picked up this nonfiction, which is 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. This was on my TBR for a while now because I saw this in a video that featured feminist books. As the title suggests, we're following 3 women with different stories. They're not related to each other. So we have Lena. She's a homemaker, a wife, and her marriage is pretty much falling apart. So she goes and rekindles an old flame and starts a secret relationship. Then we have Sloane. She's a gorgeous woman who is super successful, a restaurant owner with her husband. They're happily married, And additionally to that, he likes watching her having intercourse with other men and women. And lastly, we have Maggie. The story starts when she's a 17-year-old high school student who starts having a secret relationship with her married English teacher, which then ends up in criminal court. These are all true stories, and in Maggie's case, the names actually have not been altered, at least Maggie's name and the teacher's name, which I already forgot, so you can literally just Google and see what happened there. So from the prologue, you learn that these women have been interviewed over the course of almost 10 years, and this is the result of that. And the intent was to explore women's sexual desires because it's often still a taboo topic. And a lot of times women are just still not asked what they want or need out of a sexual or emotional relationship. I have very, very mixed feelings about this book because this is very, very nuanced. I know that the characters are not supposed to be likable characters that you can identify with, or whose actions you can comprehend. You don't necessarily have to relate to them. They're just meant to be understood and heard. But in the end, the most overwhelming feeling I had for these women was pity. And I don't know if it's supposed to be like that, or if it's kind of a byproduct of how the story was told, but that was not necessarily the author's intention. It just wasn't the empowering feminist read that I was expecting, but if my expectations are wrong, that is completely on me. I thought, or I wish, that this was more about these women taking control of their situations, of their desires, or learning how to be in charge of their sexuality and their well-being. But in the end, they were more so controlled by the men in their life, by everybody else in their family, and the way that the story was told, it felt to me like they were almost portrayed as slaves of their urges, which, if that is the truth, that is completely fine, right? This book is not supposed to make you feel comfortable. It's okay that I was uncomfortable reading this at times, but I'm just not sure if the portrayal of these women did justice to what the intention of the book was. But then again, who am I to judge what the intention of the author was? So you can tell that I'm having a very hard time reviewing this, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about this, which is okay. I still would recommend this to anybody who's interested in a feminist read, but I'm just telling you, don't expect an empowering book about women taking control, because this is really not that. I honestly just felt sad for these women, and that disappointed me. But again, if that is the life that they were living at that time, then what are you gonna do? On the other hand, it's good that nothing was sugar-coated. Yeah, very interesting read, very complex. But in the end, complex is what a woman's life is. Please let me know your thoughts if you have read this book. I'd be so curious to hear what you thought. That was all the books that I read. Please let me know if you picked up any of these already, and what are your thoughts, especially on Three Women. Thank you so much for subscribing and watching my videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.